Conversation. My apologies, John McKay, for keeping you waiting. President and CEO of the Mississippi Manufacturers Association. You want to weigh in on this, or you want to just go to a different?
No, I'm going to go in a different direction. I do not have any expertise on that topic.
We got some pretty interesting economic news a couple of days ago that Mississippi is for this past year, 2024, number 2 nationally in GDP growth. Now, I know manufacturing plays a role in that, and there's some numbers specific to the manufacturing industry. Well, but in terms of the big news, that number 2 ranking, the $2.4 billion in growth year over year for GDP Mississippi, what stands out to that for you?
Yeah, so I think the good economic news and progress for Mississippi just continues. And I think that is a testament to the policies, the pro-growth policies that we've seen from the current governor, Tate Reeves, who has been a phenomenal leader, almost singularly focused on the economic progress of our state and GDP growth and really per capita growth in incomes has been something he has been laser focused on. And these are all trends that are moving in the right direction. Also have to hand it to the legislature for really over the past decade. So not the current legislature necessarily, but over the last 10 years have really stepped up their game with pro-growth tax policies and then really investing in our economic development arm. So site development is huge so that when companies find a decent site in Mississippi, it's ready to go and they can start turning dirt. Those are the kind of things that really go into the good news that you saw yesterday in that report. So really, the trends are good.
Yeah, I do think that's important to point out. I mean, obviously the governor gets the headlines when you get a major economic announcement, but there are a lot of people that are involved for months, if not years, leading up to that announcement of, hey, this project is coming, and the legislature has to play a big role in that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget our other partners in that. Just to your point, whether that's local economic developers, we have some phenomenal, you've had them on your program before, some phenomenal local economic developers around the state, as well as folks like our utility partners. Most people don't understand all of the different conversations that take place leading up to that big announcement. We've stood up Accelerate Mississippi, who I know you've had Dr. Taylor on your show recently. Yeah. These are all things that move the needle in the right direction.
In terms of specific manufacturing products, we've seen major announcements. Some of them are in the technology space, but we do have stuff that's happening in the manufacturing space, and it's a mix, right? I mean, you've got new companies that are coming in, but if you wanted to equate it to a sales cycle, you might call it upselling, right? You have a customer, and you've got a new product, and they decide that they want to buy that product from you as well. You've got manufacturing companies that are doubling down on their investment, whether they're a homegrown Mississippi company or a company that's moved here previously, saying, we're going to invest more. We're going to add another product line. We're going to expand our facilities, whatever it is. What is it that's leading to more of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just our natural, some of the natural assets that we have in Mississippi really play a role in that. And obviously you mentioned companies that are already here. And I represent the Mississippi Manufacturers Association. So those are manufacturers that are currently in Mississippi, employing Mississippians and spending their money here. And I think they see our workforce is always a positive. Again, looking at the pro-growth policies, lower taxes, sensible regulations, a state government that's not antagonistic. I talked to some of my counterparts around the country, and they have so many hurdles in front of them, whether that's environmental permitting or tax regulations. All these things play a big part, and they look at Mississippi and say, hey, I can do business there, and they're going to make it easy for me. And that's just going to be the quickest way I can make that profit. And so I think that's all playing to our favor.
As you mentioned your colleagues there, as you hear from them and it's a really competitive environment in terms of recruiting businesses to states, right? And especially in the part of the country that we're in. Louisiana is trying to drive economic development. So is Alabama. So is Arkansas. So is Tennessee. So is Texas. So is Florida. What is giving Mississippi the ability to compete, to swim in those deep waters with surrounding states that want the exact same thing?
Yeah, well, I'll sort of make it analogous to your sports world that you're familiar with, and the SEC translates into economic development. I mean, we are the best conference in economic development. We have the high. If you look at the announcements around the country, from Texas to Florida and north, that is where the most growth is really happening. And so we're playing on the most competitive field down here. And we really have to look at our neighbors and decide, hey, we need to get better in this space. So that's taxes, that's site development, all of those things. And it's tough out there.
Let's continue the conversation on the other side. I want us to talk about tariffs. Obviously, that is something that manufacturers are looking at very, very closely, and today is a pretty significant day on the calendar. More with Mornings with Richard Cross after this on SuperTalk Mississippi. Mornings with Richard Cross rolling on with you on SuperTalk Mississippi. Glad to have you along for the ride. President of the United States has dubbed today, April 2nd, as Liberation Day. I'm not sure everybody in the manufacturing industry looks at it that way. Tariffs are a very, very real conversation. You know, John, visiting with John McKay, he's president and CEO of the Mississippi Manufacturers Association. John, one of the things that we've heard in this tariff conversation is it may hurt for a little while, but this is a long-term play that ultimately will put the United States on better footing. How much short-term pain can manufacturers that you represent deal with for that long-term gain?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because, quite frankly, tariffs have not been used in this way in 80 plus years. I mean, and really coming out of World War II, the consensus was that opening trade was a benefit not only for the folks that had tariffs imposed on their goods, but really for the United States as well. And that's been the trend. So this is new territory on a macro level. But I do think that there is an ability to withstand some short-term pain. But unfortunately, because all of our supply chains and really the world economies are so intertwined, if you start pulling at those threads, I think there's some ancillary harm that's done. And sometimes firms are not going to be able to withstand that. So if your product all of a sudden becomes 25% more expensive, which ultimately a tariff is a tax that flows down to the consumer, that could really harm you with the bottom line, and you might not be able to stay in business long term. So that scares me, that the short-term pain leads to long-term issues in competitiveness.
Matthew in Grenada sends us a message, says Mississippi is definitely moving in the right direction in economic development, which brings up workforce development and education, which brings up the school choice bill that would have been another arrow in our quiver for developing the future workforce. I'm not asking you to specifically weigh in on the school choice conversation, but how much of what happens at the Capitol, outside of what we were talking about earlier, right? Laying the groundwork, creating the opportunity for businesses to come to Mississippi, manufacturers to come to Mississippi. How much of the other stuff that happens at the Capitol, the state income tax law that goes into place, the school choice conversation, does that play a role when manufacturers are deciding yes or no in terms of moving a company from your perspective?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, you bring up the tax bill, which, personal income tax doesn't necessarily affect a corporation or a manufacturer in my space, right. But you know what does? That additional investment in infrastructure that was a piece of that package. So if our roads and bridges and ports and rail systems in Mississippi are invested in and become world class, that's going to have a direct impact on the ability of a manufacturer to move their product. I mean, look, raw materials have to come in, employees have to get to and from work. The finished products got to go out quickly to markets around the world. I mean, those are the types of investments. And that's just one example this session. So there's usually a dozen every session that you would look at and think in a vacuum, oh, that doesn't really impact manufacturers or industry in the state. It absolutely does. And that's why we're so focused on each session to ensure that manufacturers and really businesses in general have the best ability to be competitive. You know, I mentioned that SEC conference. Yeah, that's huge, but manufacturing is global. We have a massive amount of trade that goes beyond the United States border from Mississippi.
What's the one thing that keeps you awake at night? What's the one issue that is most concerning to you in the manufacturing space right now?
I will say uncertainty right now. And you brought up tariffs. That's one of the pieces. And I think most of your listeners understand that in the business world, certainty is extremely valuable. Just to know that today, these are the rules, and in a year, these will be the rules, and 5 years down the road, this is what it's going to look like. That's how they make investments. Absolutely, 100%. And so you really have to make sure that you're creating that environment where a business can plan long term, and that's how you get those reinvestments that we talked about earlier. So if a company needs to increase their product line, I want them to look at Mississippi and say, hey, that's our best bet to deploy additional capital spending for our company. And if we don't have that certainty, and whether it's tariffs or workforce issues, that can really cause companies to dial back those investments. And that's what I'm most afraid of.
Uncertainty, and we have uncertainty in lots and lots of areas right now. John McKay, thank you so much for your time. Always enjoy the conversations. Appreciate you hanging on a few extra minutes to get the conversation started.
Thanks, Richard.